introduce Stan Mendenhall, a colleague of mine in humanities, teaches political science, and I think you guys all know him anyway, so without further ado.
Teach history.
Oh, teach history?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
Well, obviously I should be taking some of your classes. Anyway, without further ado, this
Thanks.
is our main feature presentation.
Wow. First, I want to thank Amy Glass and the library for this opportunity to speak. I have a few things in mind today. Now, the first question I should ask, how many have read the book? Has anybody had a chance to? Okay, good. So first, what I want to do, though, is give kind of a brief review of the book, of some other ideas. And I want to expand beyond the book itself into the idea of peace movements in general. And then it'd be kind of boring, since quite a few of my students, you don't want to hear me lecture anymore. So I want to try to make this more interactive, see if you guys get some of your ideas and thoughts about the theme of the book, okay? So this is the Book of Joy by Douglas Abrams. It's based on and by the way, for those who have not read it, I really recommend it, and because it has a very important message in it. And this is part of where I want to kind of give a little bit of a review of the book. It's based on a meeting between Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama for several days in April 2015 in Dharamsala, India. Okay, and this meeting between these two men is important because they're both elderly. I believe Desmond Tutu is 80 years old now, and he's suffering from cancer. So this was probably the last meeting between these two men, and that's one of the reasons why it was important. And the other thing is that, well, I'll get to this part in a minute. The book's divided into three main sections: the nature of true joy, the obstacles to joy, and then the 8 pillars of joy. In reviewing the book, and I don't want to be too critical, but there's a little bit, the message is very basic, very fundamental, and it's sometimes clouded by too much information. Abrams spends quite a bit of time in the book recounting the friendship, the banter, the laughter, mischievousness between the two men. And I think he's doing that because he wants to show that he wants to demonstrate their friendship, that these two men are really, truly friends. And the idea, why would he want to emphasize the friendship? Because it transcends religious belief. That is a key component of human relationships in the book. The other thing that he does that I think is a little distracting is that he does talk about, he gives some major concepts particularly about Buddhism, and then he tries to give scientific evidence to back it up. That's kind of unnecessary. He could have added it to another part of the book, and then the message would have come out even clearer. But even at that, the message of the book is not lost at all. Okay? So let's get a little bit of background. I want to talk a little bit about the Dalai Lama. His background, and by the way, the handout I gave you is a brief timeline of both men's life. And the Dalai Lama is an interesting character to me because I teach Buddhism a little bit in my classes. The word Dalai Lama means the ocean of wisdom. His official residence, although it's no longer, is the Potala Palace in Lhasa in Tibet. He belongs to the Gelugpa tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and this is the largest, most influential tradition in Tibet, obviously, because at one time he was the both spiritual and temporal leader of Tibet. There have been 14 Dalai Lamas, and when you look at the long history of China, that's really relatively recent. It's not that long a period of time. According to Buddhist belief, the current Dalai Lama is a reincarnation of a past Lama who decided to be reborn again and continue his important work here on earth rather than ascending into nirvana. And those of you who've had my East Asia class or 111, what is that spirit that stays behind to help others attain nirvana? Bodhisattva, right. They believe, the current Dalai Lama, by the way, his name is Tenzin Gyatso. They believe, the Buddhists believe, or Tibetan Buddhists believe, he's the 14th reincarnation of the original Dalai Lama, and who is the reincarnation of Avalokitesvara. And this is the Bodhisattva of compassion. So you have that. I think that fits the nature of the idea of the book immediately. So how do they find, I was interested, how do they find the Dalai Lama? How do they know who this individual is? Well, some of the high lamas, then, there's a variety of ways they will. One is one of them will have a dream. And in this dream, there's some mark or location that will identify who the boy is. Smoke. During the course, when the previous Dalai Lama is cremated, the direction that the smoke will take or the form that the smoke will take will give them some indication of who the next Dalai Lama will be. And then there's also a holy lake, Lamo Latso, that is something of, they'll look at the waters of the lake, see the direction they take, the form of the waters, and that will give them some insight into who the next Dalai Lama will be. Then they go on a search for the Dalai Lama when they get those indicators. Interesting thing then is that it might be a 3-year-old boy, and what they'll do is they'll set down a lot of artifacts in front of the little boy, and if he picks up the artifacts that belong to the previous Dalai Lama, that's an indicator that he's the next Dalai Lama. So they do have these kinds of unscientific methods of deciding or finding out who the Dalai Lama is, or the next Dalai Lama. So the question is, why is the Dalai Lama important today? And I'll throw that out to you. Why do you think the Dalai Lama is an important individual today? He's lost his home. He now is in Dharamsala, India. So why is he important as a individual?
It's a symbol of like Tibetan nationalism, I guess.
Okay, that's okay. Tibetan nationalism, which is a political position, he does represent that element of Tibetan independence, Tibetan political integrity. What else? What other reason might it be important beyond the political one? Well, let's stay with the political one though. He represents Tibetan independence in opposition to who?
China.
Chinese communists. Yeah. So he stands as something of a symbolic opposition to Chinese communism. Okay, and for that political purpose alone, he would be an important individual. What else, though? Go beyond that, though. Go beyond the political side. Why would he be important?
Because I guess he's quite old, so maybe next incarnation.
Yeah. Yeah, he's elderly, so they were looking for although some of you may be aware of the news, what about the next Dalai Lama?
He said there will be not another Dalai Lama.
Yeah, he himself has said there may not be another Dalai Lama, and there is a search going on for one, but it's been kind of a subdued search for the next Dalai Lama. Okay.
Why won't there be another one?
He believes, well, it's a combination of political and spiritual. I hate to say it in terms of him, but he's a very positive person, but he sees that it is it's run its course, might be the way to say it. That it has, it's not achieved its goal, but it's run its course. Yeah.
And this is the Bon sect of Buddhism, right?
Which sect?
The Bon?
No, it's a Gupta
Oh, Gupta.
sect, yeah, which is major influence in Tibet. Yeah, now, a little bit more about him. He's been criticized for, well, what would be some of the criticism that's been thrown at the Dalai Lama?
Regardless of whether or not he's a theological leader, he's still technically a king of a country. And it could be that he's trying to rally support so that he could get his power back.
Yeah, although if you look on the timeline near the back of it, for his lifespan, about 4 years ago, he abdicated that position. He abdicated temporal power and gave it up to an elected leader of Tibet. So he has given up that aspect. And again, I hate to say this, but I see a degree of, he's given up somewhat? I don't like to say it that way, but it appears that he doesn't have the, after having been lost his homeland, more than 50 years ago, has he lost some of his direction, some of his enthusiasm? I'd hate to think so, but that might be a possibility. One thing, he's been criticized for being too pacifist. In Tibet today is, again, there's a strong resistance in Tibet to the communists, although every generation is being diminished. And there are those who argue that he should be more aggressive. There are even those who advocate violence, but he is, again, that would belie his nature. And he's a strong advocate of peace. So is he still relevant then?
I'm
would say yes. I mean, to me, he's just like a worldwide symbol of a peaceful, a person who's a peaceful resistance in his own way. I mean, I think
Nonviolent.
he's respected and looked to as an important human being throughout the world, I believe.
Has he made, well, I agree with you, but I'm trying to think of outside my vision of him. Is he losing his relevance in the world today? Both he and Desmond Tutu, that's why this is such an important book, though, is because both he and Desmond Tutu represent that strong sense of peace. But are they becoming irrelevant in a world is the world passing them by? I guess is the way to put it. Yeah.
I think that for the large part, the Dalai Lama is at least a household name, and while violence may be extremely effective, it's not really that much of a... If he were to take control through violence, then he wouldn't exactly be as revered as he is today, or relatively speaking.
So you have to have the violent nature, not violent aspect for his peace movement to be relevant, to be important?
Yeah, right. In order to have a strong
Counter.
peace movement and more of a strong social, not really social following, but
Yeah.
enough people to know and revere him for who he is,
Right.
it makes sense for him to
Okay.
be peaceful.
Yeah.
Like he was saying, like violence is a more easy thing to come by. Like it's more easy to do. And
Yeah.
It's easy, but to win with, like a pacifist, like not fighting, takes a lot more dedication.
Yeah, we'll get
Which
into
he
that.
symbolizes.
Yeah, yeah, because that's a major component of the belief system. Amy?
I was going to say, you mentioned him being a household name, and I'm not so sure I believe that anymore. I mean, I remember way back when in like the 80s and 90s where you'd go to anything, a lot of Hollywood people, and they mentioned the Dalai Lama, and they went going to the Dalai Lama and, were good friends with him. And not anymore. I mean, that's just not.
Yeah.
not
Well,
really
part of that
right.
might be because he is elderly, he doesn't travel nearly as much. Also, do you think that I remember at one time Richard Gere,
Yeah,
big
that's
Hollywood
what I was
star, was a
thinking.
big shot with him, promoted him a great deal. Did that hurt his image, though, because it became kind of a Hollywood
Could be.
symbol rather than a more spiritual religious symbol? That might have hurt his image somewhat, too. In any case, he is an advocate for peace and pacifism. And I want to mention just a few things about peace movements in history, because in looking at this, I kept looking beyond just the concept of joy on an individual level and how that can move to a larger realm into peace movements in general. Oddly enough, peace movements as a movement didn't get started until after the Napoleonic Wars in the early 1800s. Prior to that, there were a lot of individuals who advocated peace, but no real general peace movement. Okay, and so you begin with that, with the Napoleonic Wars, and even then, after those wars, they were very scattered. There was the New York Peace Society, the London Peace Society, and then in 1840s was the International Peace Conference in London. So that really in 1843, that was the first real conference that was for the purpose of promoting international peace. Now, the interesting thing, though, is where politics comes in again. Second half of the 19th century, who would have influenced peace movements in the world after about 1850, 1860? What individual? Marx did. You have the international movement by Marx, National Peace Council. So Marxism promoted peace in opposition to capitalism. Okay, again, a political movement. Then you move to the early 1900s to Gandhi. As early as 1908, Gandhi was exchanging correspondence with Tolstoy, and in their correspondence they talked about peace movements. So, and the nature of peace. So you have that. That's the beginning. Gandhi I think, represents a real strong beginning of an international peace movement. And again, I don't know if you've read Gandhi. And this is one of the more important, I think, lessons from this book. In kind of a subtext of it, is that advocating peace is not just something like, putting your two fingers up for peace. It's a conscious, continuous effort. It's a philosophy, a way of life. And that was something that Gandhi really advocated, really strongly adhered to in his own belief system. Interesting quote by Gandhi. There are many causes I am prepared to die for, but no cause I am prepared to kill for. So you have that kind of real contradiction in his sense of I shouldn't say that, a real continuity in his belief in peace. Then after World War I, peace movements became widespread. World War I was such a devastating event. It was widespread. World War II, nuclear age. You have campaign for nuclear disarmament, and you find Japan becoming extremely pacifist after World War II. You have Martin Luther King, civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, Vietnam, the peace movement in Vietnam, and now, where are we at? 17 years at war. Where's the peace movement today? After 17 years of war. And we have no peace movement to speak of. And that's kind of a little bit, that's why I kept thinking about the idea of how relevant these ideas are, or these men today, because is there someone out there who will pick up the mantle from these two and take over the advocacy of peace? Yeah.
I think that society, or at least American society from what I know, has become far too vitriolic for that to be foreseeable in the near future. But I think that maybe because...
So violence is one?
I think that maybe because we're so angry and we use so much frustration and so much demonstrations and all this, that eventually we could get a peaceful, someone who greatly endorses pacifism.
Well, let me, I'll throw in, you guys have had my 117 or, my 117 or 111 class. Throw in that Greek concept of arte. You probably don't want to hear it again, but it's the idea that we all share in responsibility, right? That we all work for the good of the whole, and the idea is that we all contribute. And that was the idea of a republic. So right now, if I'm sitting in this nice, wonderful room, comfortable, and yet we have only 1% of Americans who are defending their country. What would it be like? Would we still be at war if we had 100% of us engaged in the war? How many wars would there be if you had everyone involved in seeing the devastation of it? So you have that, when only a few have to really make that sacrifice, it's easy for the rest of us to kind of sit back and let it continue. Yeah.
So do you think it's more like yin and yang? There's so much negativity in the world, there has to be someone or some group
To balance it.
out. And there's clearly last 17 years, you said last 20 years, really, the violence has been rising incredibly.
Well, that's a good question. Is there a yin and yang in this, in what's going on in the world right now? Are we in a yin stage, a yin phase, and we have to find that yang that will bring it back to balance?
Like nature always corrects itself, like it always, so much happens, it always corrects itself again. So I'd see there will be a peaceful movement, but not sure when, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
That goes back to the old philosophy of how good times create weak men create weak times create strong men. It's a cycle.
So are we in a phase, just a phase now, of more, violence, more pessimism, and that will move on and will become a more optimistic period after this? Hopefully so, if that is the case.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
I wonder if people see the peace movement as not effective. So, for instance, the Vietnam War was basically stopped after the Pentagon Papers were revealed. And the peace movement, there were demonstrations for a decade, but nothing happened. And then the Pentagon Papers came out, and of course we had Watergate, and so that was putting the kibosh on the war. So I wonder if people are just getting cynical and say, what's the point of having a peace movement? It doesn't do any good.
So our ability to affect our government is diminished?
It might be.
Yeah.
I'm throwing that out. I'm just wondering if that's...
No, I think you're right. That, again, I don't get into weeds and what's going on with our American government right now, but when you have safe political districts, I don't care if it's a Republican or Democrat, if their district is safe, they can do whatever they feel like without fear of losing their job, their position. And that's not how democracy is supposed to work. And that's, again, getting back to that idea of the good of the whole, rather than for themselves or a particular group. Yeah.
That's another problem too. Humanity is set on destruction. That's how they grew. Like they had to fight other tribes. That's like in their blood, like our blood again. And it's hard to find somebody who's pure enough to get rid of that or just get it out of their life.
So where does it begin? Now let's get away from the meta side of this. Where does it have to begin? Doesn't have to begin with the individual. Yeah, you can't. It has to start with one individual that would say that will, and I shouldn't say one individual. It has to start with every individual, taking up that attitude of a more peaceful, cooperative, non-centered world, self-centered world. Yeah.
That's the bad part about that, because violence is more easy to come by than that,
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah,
hard to get to
and that may be the final point I want to make today. All right, so let's get back to the personal side of this then. And I said I asked to start with the individual. Here's some questions I have for you, and I want you to take a minute or two. You can talk it over, with somebody by you, and see what kind of answer you come up with. First question is, how do you define joy? Okay, so how would you define joy? Again, the major theme of the book. How would you define it?
A release of dopamine.
All right. Any other? How would you define joy, other than a drug-induced one? Any ideas?
I think it's an internal
Absolutely.
feeling, but an internal, kind of, it's a person's countenance, kind of.
Yeah. Well, in reading this book, one of the problems I had was the word joy. What would be another word that we could substitute for joy?
Pleasure?
I'm sorry?
Pleasure?
Pleasure. Okay, pleasure has its own kind of connotation that it's almost too much in one direction, isn't it? I'm thinking more of a stoic, that there's this kind of neither good nor bad. There's this center. And joy is what would contentment
Yeah.
might be a better word,
Yeah.
possibly, okay? Would that fit? Although joy has a more positive connotation than contentment, okay?
It's more on the side of happiness.
Yeah,
contentment
yeah.
than of
So
joy.
when you said happiness, yeah, or pleasure, that fits more the concept of joy. But is that a Western? You have to think of that idea without adding a Western sense to it. Yeah, because in the West, when you talk about pleasure, what do you talk about? Vegas, or some food, or some kind of I got a new car. That's our sense of pleasure, right? So that's why it's difficult to think of a different word than joy, but at the same time, because they're all pejorative in some way. But joy, it just seems to be one that's kind of a little too vague for me. Okay, or at least for mine. So let's go the other direction. How would you define suffering? We had a hard enough time with joy. How would you define suffering? Yeah.
I'd say internal again, but more,
Okay, that's the whole point, though.
yeah, internal, but it's, I guess, focused on the environment around you. Does that make sense?
What do you mean?
Because suffering, say depends on the environment. If you live, say, in a rural area, which is, very poor, very bad, you suffer more. But if you're living like in a city, like it's easy to come by, you have less suffering. But like you're saying, it also goes part of that. If you live in a rural area, there's more diseases and such, which suffers more because it takes part in you and other people.
Okay, but again, the major point of this, even when you're surrounded by all that, with all that external stimulus, how can you still experience joy yourself? And that's the point that they're trying to make here. Is that, all that external stimuli, all that external horrible nature, you still can be a joyful person. And that's the point they're trying to make, is that don't let that external stuff interfere with your sense of being joyful. Okay, yeah.
I think that's kind of where the distinction needs to be made between physical suffering and existential suffering.
Okay,
In that physical suffering is anything like just pain,
Sure.
Disease,
Right.
things that you could,
well, but excuse me for interrupting, but go do both. I don't care if it's external pain, that type of physical pain, or existential pain or suffering. How do you define it?
Simply to me, it's being miserable.
Okay, all right. What's the source of that misery?
Some of it's brought on ourselves.
Yeah.
Negative self-talk.
And isn't that their point in here?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is that you are thinking about what?
Yourself.
Myself.
Yeah.
That's selflessness. Quit thinking about yourself. And that's their point in this. If you think about, I got up this morning. I was like, man, I don't feel like going into work today.
Yeah.
I was really glum, and I thought, I've got it bad, don't I? You know,
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just, you know, I want to roll over and sleep another hour. How tough can I have it when that's all I have to worry about? So quit thinking about, you know, it's like, come on, get up out of bed, Mendenhall. You know, what do you have to complain about? So that would be, fits that idea that, what is suffering?
Miserable, like being miserable is just like that. What you said, like waking up, you know, it's it's bad, but suffering is where it's such a toll on your life. It's hard to escape it. Like you can't, like that's all you focus on.
Yeah.
Like how you complain about, you just can't find joy because that's all
And,
we're
and
taking.
once again, the theme of the book is it all comes back to me. I'm thinking about me and how bad I have it, how horrible it is for me. Me. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. If you can, their major concept in this is if you can escape that concept of me, a lot of that suffering will be eliminated. That sense of suffering. If not physical, then certainly existential. Another question, do we as humans have control over our emotions? Kind of. That's not waffling on it, kind of. What do you mean, kind of?
Well, we can manipulate our emotions in any way we want, whether it be through thinking or through chemical additives or just general, like that's how a lot of companies are able to get people addicted to stuff.
Okay, but what's the point of that? What's the point of asking if we can control our emotions? I remember one comment in the book was that if somebody does something that makes you angry, you immediately react. And what did they say you should do instead? Those of you who read it, do you recall it? Said, don't react, pause, and then respond. And if you wait, what do you eliminate? The anger, the emotional aspect, and you have a more reasoned response. I think they use examples of driving through the city. The guy cuts him off. You know, I'd be terrible at this because then you got cut off. You're angry, mad at the guy, and his comment was, well, maybe he needs to get to the hospital. Well, okay, wow, that's pretty generous, But isn't that the idea? That we can control. We can, instead of having that immediate reaction, pause and respond in a more neutral tone. This fits what we've been talking a little bit. What is the boundary between good and greed? You want to have a good life, especially a Western concept. You want to have a good life. What separates good from greed?
It's the way I live by a Catholic. So, if I win, it's a good joke, but win a lottery, right?
Yeah.
I'd have to me, symbolizing, I gotta give 10% back of what I get. So I'd say that is good. Man, I get still a lot more, but I give 10%. So say I won $100 million, I'll give $10 million back, like to a church or a
Yeah,
charity, how that
right.
goes. I see that as good, like giving back to the community,
So how much do you have to be good? And when it does, and to the point that it doesn't cross over to being greedy. How much do you have to have? How much stuff? How many possessions? You guys have had my 111 or 231 class. We talk about 4 Noble Truths. And that's that idea, that, well, how much stuff do I really need to be happy? Does that new car, does all that stuff make me happy? Or is it just one of those surface things that's covering up the real lack of content in my life? Yeah.
I think it's different. It will elevate. For example, if I'm hungry now, what I want is like some food. But if I'm full, I may want some more luxurious to fulfill my emotions.
Yeah. So emotions come in again,
I will
don't they?
constantly want more and more, better
Yeah.
things.
So where does that cross over to being greedy then? When you go from having enough, satisfaction, contentment, security, into being greedy? Yeah.
when you start to get things just to show off, like show your status, say like that new car you get, and say it's like a $100,000 car, you just buy it to have it, but you don't need it, it's not good, but just to show off your status, I think that's when greed comes in, and you want to buy more and more to get higher up on
Yeah.
other people.
Where would Western civilization be without that, though? Huh?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that to a certain level, motive and intent is a strong aspect of greed versus good. Because if you're going for a motive of, all right, well, I want to have higher social standing, you gotta ask yourself, why? Because that feels good. Why? And that. But if you're going to, I want to do this in my life, and that's it. If you're just doing things to essentially reach that goal, and that's not exactly greed, that's just a means to an end.
Okay, so you could have $50 million and not be greedy.
Yeah,
Okay.
if you just see it as, it's just money,
All
whatever.
right, but then if that was not your goal in the first place, what would you do with $50 million?
Right.
You, I would hopefully you'd give it away,
Yeah.
because that wasn't your purpose for working anyway. The example, I use this in my class too, I'll change it a little bit. Who would you have more regard for, the man who gave money, contributed something anonymously, or who contributed something and put their name behind it? Which one deserves more admiration? Okay, would you agree anonymous
It
donor?
doesn't
Why?
matter for me.
Why would that be? Why would you think that? Why would you have more regard for that person?
Because the person who put their name there wants recognition. for
Something
what
in
they
return.
did. Yeah, something in return.
Okay,
The person that's anonymous.
you're just doing it for the
Doesn't care.
goodness of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So is that a better answer? Is that a better path to start thinking in those terms? That I don't need anything in return. If I'm going to be generous, I do it out of the sense of generosity, rather than the sense of getting anything in return. So that might be one of those points where you a starting point for someone to think that what can I contribute without asking for anything in return. That's that Greek concept of arete.
And that can be joyful.
Exactly, and that's their point here. And they're trying to get to the point that in the end, when you get all that surface stuff out of the way, a joyful life, those things that you do out of pure generosity will make you, if you have the right mindfulness, you will become joyful. That's a joyful life from your perspective. Yeah.
It's quick things. Would you consider greed, doing it for yourself, and good, doing it for others? Is greed like, in a sense?
Yeah, if you depends
you're
on
saying, like,
defining it that way. Yeah.
If you donate, $1,000, put your name on it, that's for you. If you just donate it anonymous, that's for others.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between the two. Yeah.
I'm personally not really seeing that much of a difference between the two, giving your name on it or doing it anonymously, because if you're doing it consciously so that you can feel good about doing it anonymously, that's no different than wanting it for the glory.
Well,
You're
except
doing it for-
it's internal.
Yeah, but that's still something
okay.
that you're getting.
All right.
Like
Well,
you're doing it for your own happiness.
So if that, I see your line of thinking there is feeling joyful about what you do, about the person you are, your nature, is that negative? Yeah, I want to feel good about what I do. Would you be joyful if you couldn't feel good about it? That'd be pretty hard to do, wouldn't it? You have a joyful nature background and nature to you, but at the same time not getting kind of satisfaction out of that joyful nature.
I think that a lot of it comes from what you're primarily thinking about when you give the money. If you're thinking about
Okay.
the people, or if you're thinking about this will make me happy to give it to the people.
Yeah. All right, another question. Don't give too much thought to this. What are 5 obstacles to joy in your life right now? I don't have that new car. I don't have. What are 5 obstacles to joy in your life right now? You don't have to give me 5, but what's an obstacle to feeling a joyful sense?
Self-centeredness.
What's that?
Self-centeredness.
Yeah.
My own incompetence.
Wow. You guys are going big here. I was thinking I have to grade some papers today. Any others? What's an obstacle to feeling a sense of joy?
Personally, for me, being a caregiver to more than one person.
Okay. Yeah.
Drained.
Yeah, that's exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would self-consciousness be a big one?
What do you mean?
You feel bad about yourself. I mean, you don't like your image, and that kind of, it's a pretty big.
Yeah, but
part of
that,
self-control, right? Just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a whole thought pattern about self-consciousness, because you run into so many people have such a negative sense of themselves, and you have to ask why. And that's because don't they allow some external stimulus to make them feel bad about themselves? Isn't every individual as important as another? So, anyway, but you're absolutely right. That's what causes people to feel inferior. Do you think forgiveness is a sign of strength?
Yes.
Mental strength.
Again, it's a concept we use in 231. Can you be passive? Can being passive be a sign of strength?
That depends on the situation.
What do you mean? Because if again, to go back to Gandhi or Martin Luther King, in the face of violence, you should be what? If in the face of violence, if you become violent, you become what? Yeah, you become them. But in the face of violence, if you maintain your passivity, you've transcended that violence, then, haven't you? Yeah.
Like you're just saying, it takes a lot more strength and dedication to be
Yeah, we'll get there.
self-controlled
Yeah.
rather than just,
Yeah, just
like that.
reacting into violence. Yeah. Again, go back to the. You guys probably seen this on some news clips. Go back to the civil rights movement. Those students sitting on the lunch counter stools in Greensboro, North Carolina, and they were trained for weeks prior to that. That no matter what they do to you, you cannot respond with any kind of violence at all. Because if they did, what would it become? It just becomes a riot then. And who would get blamed for it? Them. So you have that's part of where Martin Luther King picked up on a lot of what Gandhi said, because the idea was it can't be just a kind of surface idea of peace and nonviolence. It has to be it has to be incorporated into your being, a philosophy that you carry to be effective. Yeah.
I think also the scale and the position of which you're using the choice between nonviolence or passivity and action is different. Like for World War II as an example, appeasement did not work. And it would not have worked, and more people would have been sent to the concentration camps if we had not have joined the war.
Yeah, World War II is a tough item here, isn't it? Because on the one hand, you think about why is it that the Jewish people walked into the gas chambers?
They couldn't fight back.
Or why not? Why
They thought they were going in showers.
Well, yeah, although that you're right, but that's pretty well been dispelled by later in the war when they're walking down that path to the cinder block room, and there's smoke coming out of the back from the bodies being burned. They had to know this was not a shower. And also in a lot of the camps, they didn't fight back. And the reason is that there is one reason, and by the way, there's no perfect answer to this, that concept that life goes on. That from their perspective, you have 2,000, 3,000 years of Jewish history, and they've survived every attempt to wipe them out. This is another example that will not succeed, and we will transcend it. You don't transcend it through fighting back. You transcend it by going on, continuing. Again, that idea of the reed. The reed bends in the wind, and then when the wind passes, it bounces back. There's that concept of, and that's part of the it's a hard philosophy. It's not something you achieve easily. It's that hard philosophy of nonviolent behavior, philosophy, or nature. Okay. What brings you warm-heartedness? What makes you warm-hearted? What makes you feel good about yourself, what you've done?
Say generosity.
Generosity?
Like 2 days ago, I gave there's this man, he had a kid too, and he didn't have enough money for pay a soda, so I gave him $2. And it's only $2, but it doesn't bring so much happiness. Man.
Yeah.
It's heartwarming, like you said.
So would you agree, more generosity of any kind, not just giving somebody some bucks, but also
Other
helpful
places.
in some way?
Kindness.
Kindness. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think witnessing kindness also really
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah. It can spread that way. Yeah. In fact, what's the chain that's out there that you do one good deed for someone and then you pass that on to they must pass it on. Yeah. Are you generally an optimistic person? Not on Monday mornings, but are you generally an optimistic person? Would you say yes, you are, or do you? That gets back to the obstacles, right? Keeping you from being happy, joyful. Who are, you don't need to give me a name, who's one of the most compassionate people you know? Who do you know personally that is the most compassionate person you know?
I think it mostly relies in, I don't want to speak for everybody here, but like family.
Family.
Wise, mother, father.
Okay, well, let's change that then, outside your family. Who's the most compassionate person you know outside your family?
I don't know that many.
It's a bad testament, sad testament.
Yeah.
Any? I'm sorry?
I got a friend who's pretty compassionate.
Good. Friends are helpful, kind.
Not to me.
But they could be.
So then if that's the case, what are the traits? What are the traits, behaviors of the happiest, most joyful people you know? What kind of behaviors do they exhibit?
Willing to give things up rather than take.
Okay.
Good
Chen
listener.
Tzu, the concept of Chen Tzu, the gentleman. I don't ask what is in it for me, I ask what can I give? What,
Good listener.
oh yeah, absolutely. That's a kind of lost art today, isn't it? Yeah. And this goes back to, I want to get into the root of what their theme in this book. Do you agree with our minds we create our own world? We could, don't eat, every one of us, no, we're sitting in this room right here right now, but doesn't every one of us have our own reality? So you can create your own reality, can't you? And that's the point of the book, is that through, and how do you do that? And first, well, what kind of reality do you want to create?
That actually goes back to the whole philosophy of everyone has their own personal view of what the polis or what they have their own view of utopia, and they'll work towards that utopia in their life, whether it be mentally or physically, and that's how people band together, but that's also how we create differences, because we all have our different view of what that prime optimum existence is.
Yeah, now keep in mind though, that's a concept that came about 1700s in the West. And we'll look at it in a couple of my classes this semester, the idea of liberalism, the importance of the individual. And once you make the individual sovereign, then doesn't the individual, don't I become more important? And that is one of the things that conflicts with the idea of being joyful in this book. Because at the bottom line in this, don't they say to be joyful, you must lose your selfishness, your selfness? That instead of worrying about yourself all the time, worrying about your condition, it's all me, and I'm so miserable, that once you begin to shed that, what do you begin to find? You become more positive, you become more helpful, kind. You're looking outward then, aren't you? Instead of looking inward about, what about me, you're looking outward to other people. Yeah?
There's a reason we find fiction so enticing, because we get to see the world through a whole new reality that we've never seen before. So
Yeah, it gives you another perspective on another world, another reality. Yeah.
And you lose yourself in a novel.
Yeah, especially one that has those the characters are well drawn and engaging. Yeah. Here's my final point, because I've got class in a few minutes. The message I got out of this is that, and I think they mention this off and on in the book, is that the idea of being joyful is not passive. You must what? You must work at it. Okay, it's a conscious effort that in any situation when you could be just turn your back or just be blind to a situation. Instead, you remind yourself, I could help here. I could do something. And what will happen then, and they didn't go, I think, enough in this, is then what does that become? A habit, a trait. It builds on itself. So you become a more helpful person, more outward person, and you're not thinking about me, about yourself, and what can I do for me. I guess that's the final real point, is that it's a conscious effort on a person's part. It can't be passive. Again, you guys have had my East Asia class. We talk about the Four Noble Truths, but the final of the Four Noble Truths, which one is that? You follow what? The Noble Eightfold Path. And it's 8 what? Right mindfulness, right behavior, right actions, right. It is a prescription for living a life that doesn't what? Focus on yourself. It's a life that looks at the outside world as being more important than yourself. Is that possible in the West? It has to begin where? It's not a movement. It has to begin with each individual, doesn't it? That you have to make a conscious effort. I commit yourself to the idea that I'm going to become more selfless. Yeah.
Like, it's strength in numbers, if you will. So if one person does it, it's going to go,
Yeah.
sweep under the rug. But if you get more and more,
Yeah.
it starts to take notice, and then more people believe it, and they get into it. So yeah, it's a group effort.
Right, and that's why I asked about these two men, because there's nobody out there right now that I see that will pick up the mantle, that will be a leader to help guide more people to the idea of a selfless life. There just isn't anybody. I'm not aware of anybody anyway, that is out there advocating that kind of attitude, lifestyle. Yeah.
Doesn't the idea of introspection and working at it from oneself, doesn't that contradict the idea of getting rid of the concept of oneself?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, we talked earlier about getting rid of the concept of selfness, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't that betray the idea of introspection and starting
Well,
with the individual?
It depends on how you operate, it depends on how you manage the introspection. Yeah, I suppose if you look at it from, the sadhus in India, that the idea of becoming ultimately selfless, completely giving up all worldliness, that's not practical for us. So there is going to be a degree of selfness, but to what degree? How much can you be outward looking? So, I guess. Okay. Any final thoughts, questions, comments? Yes?
Hey, curious here. Do you think joy, a big part of joy is based on forgiveness?
Yeah.
A lot of people in their life, are relatively mean, but if you just forgive them, you just kind of...
Yeah, and they bring that up quite a bit in the book, forgiveness. And why? Because in fact, they mentioned a fellow who was thrown in prison for some years, 20, 30 years, and when he got out of prison, he said he didn't blame anybody, he had no anger. And I think the comment he made was, he said, they took 20 years of my life away from me. If I'm angry now, they'll take the next 20 away. And why? Because it eats you up. It preoccupies you, it destroys you. So you have to do what?
Actively, you have to be active.
Yeah, let it go. Actively for it, it's not a passive endeavor. You have to make yourself let those kinds of angers, traits go, and then you can become a more I don't use the word joy. I guess joyful person. Okay, in the context of the book. Okay.
Stan, do you want to pull the name out for the draw?
Oh,
This is the
okay.
draw for the book, so.
All right. Is my name in
I don't know, did you put it in there?
here? No. James Milano.
I actually won something?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, congratulations.
You won this.
Yeah.